Assalamualaikum. My name is Fadwa Wazwaz, and I wanted to share with you some propaganda techniques to recognize while we're listening to the news. And internally, maybe we are genuine that we want to do the right thing. Some of the techniques, and I took this from a site, an educational site, and I'll put it in the description of the video. Some of these techniques are usually used to brainwash and manipulate people, and people are not maybe aware of it. So I want to start off by educating people what to look for. Starts off propaganda with like stereotypes and certain labels. You have to also always look at the labels that are constantly repeated and make sure you understand what those labels mean. Because at times people can, as I mentioned in the video on seeking God as a witness and why we need sometimes to certify a certain label. An example of that and just regular everyday realities is organic. Now we see like organic, and then we find out later that this is not actually organic. So you need to have like someone that certifies based on certain criteria, definition, that this is indeed organic, certifier, someone that can certify for us. So be careful of certain labels and stereotypes that are constantly repeated, because that could be an aim to promote propaganda, but also to brainwash you. Things like in this current situation on Gaza, Palestine, Israel, it's Hamas. Hamas. Terrorism, you hear that often. Anti-Semitism, Holocaust, and now about Jews feeling unsafe. In a way, it's becoming like kind of a stereotype. Jews feeling unsafe. There's also another technique. This is called virtue words or glittering generality. These words are used to dupe us into accepting and approving of things, again, the key point here, without examining evidence carefully. So we just kind of like the stereotypes here, it's the other direction. Security, self-defense, fighting terrorism, preventing another Holocaust, national interest, and right now, wiping out Hamas. Anything, or throwing 2,000-pound bomb on a civilian infrastructure, wiping out Hamas. So these are called virtue words or glittering generality. Write that down to help you to understand how to read and watch the news. There is like, making a deity out of something. And this is why sometimes people do not understand the Shahada, which is like the first pillar of Islam. There is no deity except Allah. It may become important for us when we understand how at times we're unaware of how we make a God out of something that is actually then used to harm us. I believe Naomi Klein just gave I would say like a lecture to her followers on Jews taking the golden calf as an object of worship. And so it's something for us to recognize, because we also Muslims believe in that story about how a faith community can be misled into taking something else, something that they desire, that they're looking for as an object of worship. Something to look for in this particular situation, chosen people. So if you keep saying chosen people, you're basically saying I am above accountability. I'm above the law. I cannot be prosecuted. Me and my people are exempt from prosecution. So this is an issue that we have to reflect on. Another thing that the president of the United States, Joe Biden, said was common values, Western civilization. So we've made that into kind of, again, that golden calf, where what comes out of that when we just throw these words, common values, Western civilization, chosen people, when you look behind that, what is really asked is for us to treat those as holy and sacred and therefore above the law, exempt from prosecution, from investigation even. So look for the deification of things. Look for that, because it will be part of the propaganda that is propaganda technique that is used to mislead the public, and we're thinking we're doing the good thing. You know, like I mentioned in one of the posts, a lot of people with good intentions end up going on the road to hell because they're not aware of these techniques. Transfer. This is when a symbol that carries respect, authority, sanction, and prestige is used along with an idea or argument to make it look more acceptable. American flag, using like a rabbi to somehow justify a war that is actually not based on sound evidence or independent investigation. It's the method is called, again, some of the things that we look into is guilt. Some say virtue by association, depending on what you're doing with the transfer, or guilt. Like you're trying to make people feel either guilty or make them feel virtue by the mere association of that authority. So if you want people to feel like, you know, virtuous by supporting the bombing of Gaza, then you kind of bring somebody that carries prestige to support it. And we never really do an investigation into what is taking place in Gaza. Just someone like Joe Biden would stand up and say that he supports it. Then you have that, again, that transfer. Now you're taking that authority and respect that he carries, and you're transferring it to what Israel is doing in Gaza. Similarly, like you can take something, like for example, any attack like ISIS, and then transfer that. And you have seen that they transfer that guilt and they put it on Hamas, and they transfer that and they put it on the citizens, and they take Hamas and transfer that on the civilians and everybody in Gaza. So you'll see that guilt or virtue by association. So look for the transferring of guilt or virtue by looking at the symbols that they carry and where it's being transferred to. So try to look at that technique. Hillary Clinton coming and speaking about, you know, the women and the mass rapes and trying to like transfer her position in society, which is like a women's rights leader and stuff like that, and transfer that to Gaza, you know, as to say like she's transferring her respect that she has and prestige that she has right here to what is taking place in Gaza, justifying the virtue that Israel is doing, if you will, if you call it virtue, by killing Palestinian women. Like out of the tens of thousands of Palestinians that have been killed, 70% are either women and children. So we're not looking at that information. We're just looking at the prestige, the authority, the respect that Hillary Clinton carries. And we're not seeing how that transfer is taking place and what the results, what the conclusion of that transfer on the ground for the average Palestinian in Gaza. So look for transfer of prestige, authority, respected. That's a propaganda technique. The other thing is testimonial. When some respected celebrity, or alternatively, some generally hated, claims that an idea or product is good or bad. And we talked about that here. It's here is like they stand up and they will support like the war. They'll give a testimonial of why this has to take place. They're using, again, their prestige, but here they're again, either they're saying something is bad, like Hamas terrorists. Doesn't matter that people who are grounded in international law will say, well, actually they're a resistance group. It's sufficient for them to give a testimonial again and say, and make a claim. So it becomes kind of like they're taking this person as a way of above the law. And just the mere fact that they're a celebrity, and you saw that with quite a few celebrities coming up to support what is taking place, either good or bad. And again, we're not looking here at the evidence. We're looking at, this is a celebrity. He says this is good. This is a celebrity. He said this is bad. But the whole time, for the average individual that is watching and absorbing all this information, they're not looking to say, are there independent investigations? Is there a body of law that came together and, you know, ruled on this issue? These type of questions are not being asked. They're simply saying, this celebrity said this is good. This celebrity says this is bad. So basically, they're taking that celebrity as a neon god to tell them what is good and what is bad. Then they go to the plain folks, sometimes because we think this is a plain person, you know, meaning like they don't have a celebrity status, that somehow, again, that's also because, again, you have to look at how the propaganda works. This is a way when a speaker convinces an audience that an idea is good because these are the same ideas that the vast majority of people like yourself, you know, so they would tell, like, you know, what would you do if Hamas, you know, if like Canada broke and through the borders and attacked you? What would you do if Mexico came through the borders and attacked you? And so it's kind of like speaking to the average American, but they're using, again, they're telling a story kind of like to reinforce the speaker's point of view, but not based on the whole like picture. It's just they're taking a half truth and they're trying to get the vast majority to buy into it just based on the getting them into the same position as the Israelis settlers who faced the October 7th attack. What would you do if these, you know, people from Mexico came in? What would you do if people from Canada came in and did this? Without recognizing that neither Canada or Mexico are occupied, nor are they blockaded or under an illegal siege by the United States. So this is left out, but it's, again, you're using plain folks to try to get the majority to say that the Israeli settlers were watching with glee the bombing of people in Gaza, not just after October 7th, but before, over and over again, are just like you. This is the bandwagon. This common propaganda method is when a speaker tries to convince us to accept their point of view, or else we'll miss out on something really good. The bandwagon technique is used often in advertising. This is like the wave of the future. Be the first on your block. Act now. You might ask yourself, what if I was the only one on my block because no one else was interested or duped, you know? And again, it's not looking at our values, measuring our values. It sometimes takes us into what I say, like the alternative reality. You want to fit in. You want to be part of like the crowd. who's famous, who's the celebrity. Let me kind of like jump in and connect to it because I don't want to be missing out. So you have to look at the bandwagon. Again, it doesn't ask the question, you know, take you into, you know, what are the facts? Is there an independent investigation that taken place? Is there like a body of experts that investigated the evidence and gave a ruling? It doesn't take the mind there. It takes us into, again, this alternative reality of trying to fit in part of the future, that wave of the future. You know, they're always looking into avoiding like what's right there in the present moment. And they're taking us, you know, into some imaginary future, either of fear, and they're working backwards, or again, dragging us into something. Instead of looking at the present moment, children are being incinerated. Universities are being bombed. Hospitals are being bombed. Schools are being bombed. UN shelters are being bombed. So again, all of that is escaped, and we go into the future. The artificial, you know, dichotomy. This is when someone like tries to claim there are only two sides to an issue. Hamas, Israel. Hamas, Israel, and they give this false framing of the situation. They don't bring in the voice of the Christians in Palestine. They don't bring the voice of the Jews who were there before Zionism came to Palestine. They don't bring the voices of the experts who do not, for example, may not be part of Hamas. So it becomes, again, focus on the boogeyman, and then there is Israel. Focus on the boogeyman, and then there's that Hamas controversy. So look at that way the framing is done. It's always at two sides without, in fact, recognizing all the other voices of experts that are taking place and allowing them to speak without this kind of us versus them framing that they start off the conversation. You know, so if an expert who probably never met even Hamas or knows Hamas speaks on an issue and says it's a 100-year war on Palestine, again, they support Hamas. They want the killing of Jews. This is the hot potato. Hot potato, it's an inflammatory, often untrue statement or question used to throw an opponent off guard or to embarrass them. Example of that, you'll be speaking about what is taking place in Palestine, you know, and you're talking about the settlers going on a rampage. There's a program here, there's a massacre here, and they'll say, why do you want Jews killed? Do you hate Jews? You want to wipe Israel, you know, off the map. And so again, they bring in something that is so utterly untrue that it's irrelevant, but then it brings that controversy. So instead of us discussing that there are mass graves, we're now discussing this hot potato. Stalling or ignoring the question. If you've been listening to a lot of the journalists when they speak to some of the spokespeople and they start to ask them about current situations that are happening, you will see the stalling or ignoring the question, and it'll be like, we did not investigate. We are investigating. I will call for an investigation on this. So they'll ask them about, you know, did you hear about mass graves? These journalists will be asking these folks, people for the president, you know, did you hear about, or the Secretary of State, you know, and Antony Blinken. And they'll say like, well, we didn't investigate. We're investigating. We'll call for an investigation. You know, it's a way of ignoring the question. However, no independent investigation ever takes place. It's just an attempt to ignore the questions. And if an investigation does take place, the investigation is ignored as well. Least of evils. This is used to justify an otherwise unpleasant or unpopular point of view. Palestinian children brought this upon themselves. You know, yes, it's bad, but it's the least of evils. So they brought this upon themselves. And, you know, again, you use that other techniques, like you bring in celebrities, you bring in, you know, that virtue again, transfer, bringing someone of something of authority, of respect, to say, you know, they brought this upon themselves, and suddenly everybody's hyped up into. It's okay that 2,000-pound bombs are hitting a refugee camp and we're seeing children being incinerated, because it's the least of evils. This is the scapegoat. This often used with guilt by association to deflect scrutiny. Here again, you're moving away from an independent investigation, evidence that is glaring, you know, shining at you in your face. Transfers blame to one person or a group. Yasser Arafat, Hamas, you know, so all you do is you just keep pushing Yasser Arafat, Hamas. And so the whole issue that is taking place, that 100-year war, becomes now under the rug, and you're just focused on Hamas and Yasser Arafat. You can just keep using them as a scapegoat. Cause and effect mismatch. This technique confuses the audience about what is really the cause and effect. October 7th, resistance from a concentration camp, illegally blockaded and sieged by Israeli occupation forces. Is that the cause of this issue? Or is it terrorism against peaceful and law-abiding Israel seeking coexistence with Palestinians and its neighbors? You know, it's that cause and effect mismatch. Distortion of data or out of context, or card stacking or cherry picking. This technique is used to convince the audience by using selected information and not presenting the complete story. Examples, again, would be, there's a 100-year war on Palestine. There's the two-state solution. There's the promised land for Jews. Jews were here 3,000 years ago, safe, only safe place for Jews. Or is it, and then again, you know, ongoing ethnic cleansing or apartheid. So obviously when we're looking at the propaganda technique, we'll see the two-state solution, promised land for Jews. Jews were here 3,000 years ago, safe place for Jews. And so they just kind of like, you know, again, take a cut, paste, and weave a story. What's missing is the 100-year war on Palestine, the ongoing ethnic cleansing, the apartheid, the occupation, and so on. So this is, again, the distortion of data. It's when you just cut, paste, and just weave a narrative that is totally distorted from reality. And here I want to put in a little, like, I would encourage you to read the book by Rashid Khalidi, the Palestinian historian, on the 100-year war on Palestine. It's a very good book to read to protect yourself from this cut-paste mentality. Weak inference or false clause. Weak inference is when a judgment is made with insufficient evidence, or that the conclusion does not necessarily follow from the evidence given. For example, Hamas is hiding behind civilians. And you hear that a lot. Hamas is hiding behind civilians. Well, there's a mass graves and people are zip-tied. Well, Hamas was hiding there. Hamas was hiding behind the hospitals. Hamas is in the tunnels. Hamas is evil. We're not really killing civilians or children. You just hate Jews. But Hamas is evil, you know. So it's that a weak inference, false clause mentality. It sort of guilts you from looking at the evidence and putting the evidence front and center on the table. Faulty analogy. This is when a comparison is carried too far. if you recognize this, it was right after October 7th, is the second Holocaust of Jews. I mean, they literally like kind of made what happened to the Jews during the Holocaust not a big thing. Talking about millions being killed, they're comparing it to a resistance attack given an illegal siege and an illegal blockade against Gaza that they are occupying. Even though they're outside, they're still occupying because they control everything. Once you control everything from a certain area, land, sea, you know, control the water, the food intake, as we're seeing, they don't even have, they can literally turn the power off. It means you're occupying the area. You're still occupying because your presence and your power is still over Gaza. And so you're an occupying force over Gaza. And again, that faulty analogy that when people resisted that occupation, that came to be a similar situation with what Jews faced in the Holocaust. So basically what they're telling us is that what Jews faced in the Holocaust was very similar to what Jews faced on October 7th in Israel. And so that actually diminished, trivialized, and actually reduced the gravity of, if you will, the deaths, like the fatal deaths that took place, the gravity of the extermination that took place against Jews in the Holocaust, was simply a resistance attack. Something that's, again, a faulty analogy, but it has a slippery slope, which makes the argument, again, a shift in one direction will continue to lead to extremes, which is what we are seeing right now in Gaza. And so this is, I believe, important for, and I have to thank some of the Jewish scholars, historians like Ayn Pape and Norman Finkelstein, Michael Pilat, and others who spoke up and tried to educate people about that faulty analogy. Misuse of statistics. It's important to understand that unless statistics can often be played around with in a way that people are not conscious of. Average results are reported, but not the amount of variation around the averages. Percent or fraction is presented, but not the sample size, as in 9 out of 10 protesters hate Jews. You know, so they may have asked 2 people, like let's just say that they implanted in a protest, and they'll say, 9 out of 10, hate Jews, something like that. Absolute proportional quantities are mixed, as an X number of protesters chanted for Hamas. So it's the way that they can kind of like create false. Again, this misuse of statistics, with every technique, an open, independent investigation can clearly clarify and confirm if this is a misuse of statistics or an actual use of statistics. You'll notice all these techniques fall down once you have an open, independent investigation and you push people back and center them back to that open, independent investigation and away from the hot potatoes from each side. Fear. Of course, the people don't want war. Here I'm referring to the Nuremberg trials and a quote by one of the leaders, Hermann Göring. So I have here, I'll put that also in the video, where you can kind of look in more detail about this quote. But basically, for us to reflect on, all of us, people don't want war, but after all, it's the leaders of the country who determine the policy. Again, it's that ruling class when it starts to become like a mafia. Simple matter to drag people along, whether it's democracy. Just saying that Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East is not sufficient evidence to say that it is not engaging in war crimes. That's irrelevant. I don't care if you're a dictatorship. I don't care if you're a communist. I don't care about that. Those are all irrelevant labels. General is when leaders become like a mafia, it's very easy for them, whether you have voice or no voice, they can always use propaganda techniques to bid people into war or into like to support a Holocaust or to support a genocide that's taking place in Gaza. All you have to do is tell them they're being attacked, denounce the pacifists for their lack of patriotism, and exposing the country to greater danger. And so it's very important to understand this is again someone who talked about how he recognized that you can easily manipulate the public using these propaganda techniques. So why it's important for us to educate ourselves about these propaganda techniques so that when they are used against us, we know to, again, bring things back to the ICJ ruling, bring things back to historians, bring things back to independent investigations, bring it back to the evidence, bring it back to the whole story, not the cherry picking, two-state solution, blah, blah. Bring it back, front and center to educate people so that we are not brainwashed into normalizing the abuse, the oppression, the persecution, or the genocide against others. Then I think most people understand the personal attack. This is like a deflection. You attack the messenger instead of the argument or evidence that is presented. Evidence, mass graves with people zip tied, Hamas, you hate Jews, so you're attacking the people who are saying, presenting this evidence that is, again, and you're calling for an independent investigation. And that's another thing you should look for is that they will avoid an independent investigation. Like I said, a lot of these propaganda techniques, they're immediately slayed if you just call for independent investigation and see who runs away from open, transparent, independent investigation or refuses to recognize a respected body that checks on the evidence, like the ICJ, and says, this is what I see. Look at that. That is how you deal with propaganda. Then you have, this is pronounced tu, hu, hui. This technique is used when you respond to your opponent by accusing them of for example, propaganda, or let me push this a little bit down out of the way. Again, we don't want, it goes back to like, if they're trying to say like, you're hyping people up against Jews, you're doing propaganda against Jews, blah, blah, the best thing to do is to keep bringing back to the evidence, keep calling people independent investigations, keep bringing them back to the ICJ ruling, keep bringing them back to the genocide scholars analysis. This is how you, whenever you're hearing these propaganda techniques, you got to use those methods over and over again. Are you open to independent investigations? These are the independent investigations that took place. This is the ICJ ruling. Here are some genocide scholars' analysis on the issue. You have to always go back to that, again, the whole picture, bring them back to that whole front and center, to the whole picture, to independent investigations. All these propaganda techniques fall apart when you do that. Preemptive framing. And you probably all are aware of this. Like, do you condemn Hamas? Do you condemn Hamas? It's like began with, do you condemn Hamas framing? You can frame an issue before other people get a chance to do it, you know, beheaded babies and mass rapes, you know, and then do you condemn Hamas? When in fact, there is no evidence of such accusation. Again, it goes back to here. One of the best ways is to, are you open to independent investigations? Again, all of these propaganda techniques fall apart. Are you open to independent investigations? And usually people who are involved in propaganda run. They will run. If you just put that in front and center, are you open to independent investigation? Are you open to the ruling of the ICJ? And do people like that will run? And I've noticed, like Sam Husseini, he mentioned the question, do you recognize the Geneva Conventions? See, those are the questions we should be asking and responding to the propaganda. So they did an excellent job. Do you recognize the 4 Geneva Conventions? Do you recognize the 4th Geneva Conventions? Because it brings things back to the mechanisms that we could use to analyze and measure propaganda from true stories, true reality on the ground. These are the questions we should be seeking. When a major issue comes up that is embarrassing or threatening, so diversion is created, so attention is directed away from the issue. Mass graves, ICJ ruling, deliberately targeting children. An example of that would be Hind, you know, Sidra, or even like Al-Shifa or Al-Ahli Hospital in the very beginning. It was so embarrassing, so they started to, you know, go in all directions and create some other diversion. Again, you know, all of these techniques, it goes back to bringing things back to the whole story, bringing things back to the independent scholars on genocide that have no personal gain. Like if you look at some of these scholars that sometimes they claim that they are bringing them, they have a lot, they are profiting out of genocide. So always look to check what personal profit are they making out of this. A lot of the people, because truth spreads, falsehood spreads by money, and truth spreads by sacrifice. So like if you look at, for example, Norman Finkelstein, he faced tremendous sacrifices when he wrote and spoke about the issue of Gaza. If you look at I Am Poppy, like he was banned, like some of these individuals were banned from Israel. They were like, they faced like lost tenure, or they faced some sacrifice to their speaking out, to their standing up. So you have to look for that when you're also looking for who are the spokespeople on these issues. Well, some of the others who are like defending Israel, you're noticing that they're getting like AIPAC gives them a great amount of money for their campaign. So there's something called the AIPAC tracker. So if you go to on Twitter or X right now and go to AIPAC tracker, you'll see that they get a lot of money. They get money, a lot of to their campaign. And so you're seeing that these individuals that are defending Israel, they're getting tons of money from AIPAC to do so. So again, just bring things back front and center to the whole story. Look at a respectable independent that has no personal gain, like the ICJ, or, you know, conventions that were written before this issue took place, you know, that were written of how we should be ruling or analyzing the situation. Bring it back to that. Bring it back to the evidence, the mass graves, people being zip-tied, and then bring it back to the questions that, again, do you recognize the 4 Geneva Conventions? Do you recognize, you know, Are you open to independent investigations? Do you recognize the ICJ ruling? You know, because if they're saying we're not going to recognize, then they're basically saying we're going to run like a mafia. Or they're saying we are God. Again, this is, I'll put the link to the propaganda techniques that I got from a site. So you don't think I kind of said, like studied some of these individuals that I want to attack and just came up with these techniques as a way to kind of win an argument. This is actually came from an educational site that I took and I followed, and as I'm listening to what is taking place right now. So I hope you can reflect on this as you're reading things. And if we really care about human beings as we claim, that we can make an effort to push back on these propaganda techniques by bringing front and center the evidence, the ICJ ruling, as well as all the international laws that are meant to kind of keep us accountable to each other, countries accountable to each other, to help us prevent another Holocaust. So I hope we can do that. And again, bring the situation between that is taking place, not about Hamas or Yasser Arafat, but again, 100-year war on Palestine. Bring it to the whole story, the big picture, so that we can make better informed decisions and prevent and stop the genocide that is currently taking place. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.